Welcome back. The speakers did a great job last night, opening up the topic for us. Now we have the challenge as a group to process the stories, digest the material, and make sense of this complex topic. We are going to begin the community discussion in a moment, but before we do that, I need to give a little more background to what we are doing, and then we can begin. I spoke last night of the importance of using talking and dialogue to create feedback loops, so we could assist our community culture to heal, recover, and rebuild through self-organising. I promised to bring cutting-edge psychological techniques to help us. I also said we could only do this in Australia. Let me say more about this. Science is one of the dominant stories in our culture. Unless a theory, concept, or idea has been derived from and is grounded in science, it is unlikely to be accepted by mainstream culture. Tonight I am introducing and we are going to be engaging with the scientific concept of a field. Our community in this room and beyond carries with it a field. Let me explain more. Fields are invisible, but they have the effect of organising systems into coherence the way gravity organises large bodies like planets into coherent structures like our solar system. The easiest way to imagine a field is to try and remember the experiment almost everyone did in high school using a magnet, a sheet of paper, and sprinkling iron filings on the paper. The pattern made on the paper reveals the effect the magnetic field has on the iron filings. It organises them into form. More personal than that, we would fall off the earth without gravity to hold us down. But gravity is invisible. There are many kinds of fields. For example, there are gravitational, electromagnetic, quantum information fields. These fields are accepted in science and explain to some extent the structure of our physical world. But what about the structure of living beings? What about biology? A developmental biologist by the name of Rupert Sheldrake revisited and popularised the idea that a kind of field guides the development of living creatures at every stage of their growth, called the morphogenetic field. This concept and his take on it remains controversial in the world of biological science. Sheldrake is one of a small yet notorious group of speakers who presented now banned TED Talks. Despite this, there is evidence for his ideas. He has spent much of his life acquiring experimental data to prove his morphogenetic field theory. Sheldrake rejected the idea that biological structure was determined by genetic coding alone. He proposed genetic code as being responsible for creating the building blocks of life, such as proteins and amino acids, but that the construction of biological form was actually being guided by an invisible template similar to a blueprint that operated like a field. Sheldrake suggests that over time patterns are left in the field, patterns he called morphic resonance, a kind of layering of vibration that operates like memory, and that this guides the development of living beings into form. This idea might sound a bit woo-woo, and when considered in isolation, it is. But this idea was reiterated by Carl Jung, who applied the same concept to human psychology. Jung was Freud's student, and the two could not agree on this issue. Jung was a practicing psychiatrist and observed patients become possessed by what appeared to be identities or personalities, like Jesus, a saviour. Jung thought deeply about this phenomenon and looked towards indigenous culture and the mythic stories that guided their culture for answers. Jung proposed that human beings have access to something he called the collective unconscious, a repository of collective human experiences organised into patterns. Jung disagreed with Freud about the limits of the unconscious mind. Jung believed that the unconscious mind extended beyond the human body, beyond the human nervous system, into a collective unconscious mind accessible to all human beings. Jung called the patterns of human experience archetypes. The archetypes guided human development psychologically at different stages of life and was accessible to each person through dreams and daydreaming. Freud and Jung could not agree on the nature of the unconscious mind. Their disagreement was fierce and resulted not only in an estrangement between the two, but cleaved psychology as an emerging field of study into two broad schools. Freud's view was very much grounded in the physical observations of the brain and how the nervous system worked. He was unwilling and unable to accept anything outside this. Jung's views extended into the realm of myth and mysticism and was largely sidelined by mainstream psychology as a discipline. The reason Freud could not agree with Jung was he could not see how the mechanics of the brain were being influenced and guided by archetypal patterns. Jung was unable to specify the precise mechanism by which this occurred. except to say that it happened through dreams and daydreaming. Freud believed the role of the dreams to be the process internal to the physical body and the method by which the mind cleared the cache and reset itself each day. Jung's idea about the collective unconscious could not be examined by science during his lifetime, and were therefore rejected until recently. Now we need to briefly divert our attention to the science of the very small, the science of atomic and subatomic particles, so matter, the science of the quantum universe. The observation and findings of quantum physics are very strange and defy much of the assumptions of science. That is, the reliance on observation and demonstrating repeatable findings as the method of determining the truth. This is challenging for everybody. Firstly, electrons can be in something called superposition, which means they exist potentially. They are potentially there, but not always there. Weird, right? Yes, weird. How do they come out? Good question. I will come into that in a moment. They also, interestingly, behave like a wave of light, which is not solid, and like a particle. Yes, it gets even weirder. It turns out when you try and measure or observe the activity of an electron, it actually influences the outcome of the experiment, but not in a consistent way. It is so weird. Secondly, quantum physics discovered a phenomenon called non-locality. Non-locality describes two apparently unrelated very small objects, electrons, that behave as if they are kind of related. This weirdness is called entanglement. And theorists kind of begrudgingly proposed the idea of a field of information, as being how the two tiny particles are related to each other. Quantum physics has lots of findings that disturb the accepted view of mainstream science, but physics is the science of matter, and so it is harder to reject than just putting it all down to woo-woo. Some electrons, which means particles, don't exist in the physical world until they are measured or observed, and when they are measured or observed, they are mysteriously entangled with other particles. One electron in one part of the universe is connected with another electron, maybe on the other side of the universe, but how? There is lots to say on this, but for now we need to keep the focus on our open forum. Very recently, a controversial physicist named Nassim Haramein has demonstrated using mathematical equations how every proton, a tiny part of the atom, is connected to every other proton in a kind of information network. What does all this mean for us? Rupert Sheldrake's research demonstrates how living beings somehow translate blueprint-like patterns in the morphogenetic field to build, rebuild, heal, and repair their physical forms. His research indicates plants, animals, and even minerals do this. The morphogenetic field is very, very similar to Jung's description of the collective unconscious. Quantum physics generally, and Nassim Haramein's work specifically, describes the mechanics of how information is transferred from possibility into actuality. This means our community is being shaped and defined by the influence of an invisible field of information we cannot see, but sense in our dreams and daydreaming. It means there are many potential feedback loops sitting in superposition, waiting to be collapsed into form by focusing our attention on what is unexpressed in the field. We're not going to discuss the field tonight as an idea or concept. We are going to experience the field directly by interacting with it and letting our bodies use our intrinsic ability to dream to do the necessary calculations. I had the opportunity to learn about these concepts in the presence of several Australian Indigenous elders. We shared many stories. One of the elders said to me, to help my scientific mind process these strange ideas, "Our people have known these ideas forever. We know this to be true because there is nowhere on this land we have not walked, and there is no water here." If you think about this, what she said to me is the ultimate test of the truth of these ideas. No water means no life. The morphogenetic field, the collective unconscious, and the quantum information field has been called by another name, long before Sheldrake, Freud, Jung, Haramein, and the legions of scientific inquirers who have built the Western mind ever walked the earth. It was called the Dreamtime.
And I believe, as Australians, any lasting form of reconciliation with ourselves, our present, our pasts, involves learning about and learning to work with the Dreamtime. If we can do this here on this land, in Australia, because of the legacy of the elders, past, present and emerging, the field remembers them. Then it is easier for others to do it in other places. We are, in all likelihood, to some extent, entangled with them. Quantum physics is so weird. Entanglement might even travel forward and backward in time. We don't know. So that's what I wanted to share with you before we start tonight. Right, how are we going to participate tonight? So what we have to do to begin with is try and sense the field. Use your awareness and your present time experience to notice what's happening in your body. Use your imagination. Notice what's floating through your mind. Bring your stories. Let yourself feel your own story and those of your people, the people that have gone before you. Be authentic. Be curious. Try and trust the self-organising tendency of the system. I know it sounds weird, but what that basically means is try and sense the process and trust yourself to follow it. Share your experience as best you can. When you're ready to speak, please stand up if you can, or signal for a microphone. Stand in front of the microphone, speak as best you can authentically until you run out of words. And when you're finished, please sit down again and we'll see what the group does with the response. All right, that's basically what we do. Now, so tonight when we speak from our story, we're going to be partly speaking as ourselves, but you could also be very easily speaking for someone who is not here in the room with us tonight. I know it's a weird concept, but this is kind of how the field works. Okay, so tonight we're going to start the forum in a minute, the community discussion part. So if you see one of the facilitators just come and stand next to you, they're just doing that to support you. Okay, to help you speak out, that's all.